Hi, I'm James L. Berry, and I'm the illustrator for the Warriors comic series. And today I'm going to be drawing Graystripe. So when I'm drawing a cat, the first thing I start with is a circle shape. To kind of help me figure out where the features of the cat are, I will draw lines around that circle, and then I add another circle for the muzzle. That's the little snout where the nose and the mouth are. And then I'll sketch in spots for the eyes, really lightly. I'm starting out light and loose at first. Sketch in the ears, and then I might draw some lines that go forward over the muzzle to the nose that come from the eyes. And then I sketch in the shape of the mouth, which is like an upside down Y shape. And there we have a simple cat face. Now at this point, the cat could be any cat. I could turn it into Firestar or Leafstar, but today I'm going to be drawing Graystripe. So from there I start adding the details that make Graystripe unique. So the first thing about Graystripe is that he's a long-haired cat. And so when I was designing the character, I played around with that idea and decided to give him a little tuft of hair on the top of his head. It's kind of like a little mohawk. And then I decided to give him little tufts of hair on the side of his cheeks, kind of like mutton chops. There we go. And then he also has big bushy eyebrows. So the eyebrows were important because I wanted to be able to make Graystripe expressive. So he's got 3 little tufts of hair for the eyebrows. So now we have the basic shape of Graystripe's face. He also has a squared off chin. And then when I'm doing a portrait of him, I might just kind of indicate the fur on his chest down here. So you see, I'm adjusting things as I go, kind of revising and refining the drawing. Again, it's not about making everything perfect at the beginning. It's about making the simple shapes and refining as you go. When I first started drawing Graystripe for The Lost Warrior, I thought a lot about what he had already been through as a character, and he had had a lot of hardships. Obviously, he had lost his partner Silverstream and had all this drama with RiverClan and ThunderClan, and I kind of wanted to reflect that in his eyes. So I kind of gave him these dark kind of circles underneath his eyes. But Graystripe isn't always serious. He can be playful too. So I kind of wanted to play around with the idea that he gets this sort of mischievous smile sometimes where he raises one eyebrow and keeps one eyebrow lowered. So I'm going to try to sketch him out like that with a little smile. So this is a very simple drawing, but then the fun part comes when you start to clean it up. And when I'm illustrating the Warrior series, I use a pen and ink. But you can also use microns or other kinds of pens to illustrate your drawing. So I'll be demonstrating how you could clean this up with a pen. So I like to start with like a medium-sized pen at first and sort of go around the outline of the head. All right, so I'm going around the outline of his head. And again, I'm using all these loose and lightly sketched lines and sort of refining them and picking what works best. There's his little mutton chop sideburns. Then I get his eyebrows on the far side. Now, obviously, cats don't have eyebrows in real life, but when creating a character for a cartoon or a comic strip, sometimes it's important to add sort of human elements to the character to make them more relatable and to make their expressions more readable. Okay, so I kind of went around the outline of his head. Now I start with the features on the inside. So I'm doing his eyes. There's that sort of dark line underneath his eyes. And then, like I said, I'm going to make this eye a little bit bigger. And his little eyebrow. Then we have the line that comes from the eyes forward on the muzzle towards the nose. And then his mouth shape. And then the far side of the muzzle, I use a solid line for that, going around that circular shape. So I used sort of a medium-sized pen for that. Obviously, if you only have one kind of pen, you can continue with that, but if you have different options, I like to use a thinner pen to add a little bit more detail and like little bits of fur and hair on his body. So I use a thinner pen to go around the near side of the muzzle. And I use these little dashes along the top of his nose. And then, I indicate his fur with some other lines here and there. Some fur in the ears. Okay, so now I'm going to take my eraser and erase the loose and rough pencil lines. Hopefully it doesn't smear. All right, so you can already see this is a much more cleaned up looking drawing. So from here I take a thicker pen. In this case I'm using sort of a brush pen. And here I can kind of go over some of the lines that I've already done, and if something looks rough, I can clean it up a little bit. And I like to use thicker lines on the outside of the face. And I might color in his eyes. And the underside of his little mohawk. And if I messed up at some point, I can sort of refine that with this thicker pen. Add some dark shadows in his ear. So now I can look at my drawing, and if there's anything I missed, I can go back now that the pencil lines are cleaned up or erased. I can go back with one of my other pens and maybe add some more tufts of fur in his ear. All right, and there we have a finished drawing of Graystripe, more or less. But the last thing you have to make sure is that you add his whiskers. So I do that with another thin pen. There we go. And there we have Graystripe. So Leafstar, again, I'm going to start off with a circle shape, but since I know I'm drawing Leafstar, I'm going to make it a little bit more oval because she has a longer face and more angular than, say, Ravenpaw or Firestar. She also has really tall ears, and I did that because SkyClan, they're the cats that like to jump and leap, and so I was kind of playing off the idea of sort of longer ears like a rabbit. She has a pointed chin instead of a square shape. Outline of Leafstar's face. And again, we have the circle for the muzzle. So I'm going to draw some lines that come forward. She has a thinner neck than, say, Firestar. All right. So we have the basic shape of a cat's face. So now I'm going to start adding the details that turn this into Leafstar. So she has some brown markings on her face that go around her eyes, sort of like a little mask. But I wanted there to be a leaf shape on her forehead. So that's what the white part is, sort of a leaf shape created by the mask. And it goes around her muzzle. So Leafstar also has some dark lines around her eyes. Sort of look like eyelashes. Obviously cats don't really have eyelashes like humans do, but I'm playing around with her features to make her more expressive. Okay, and I'm gonna add some detail to the nose. being clan leader, she has to be pretty serious and responsible at all times. So I'm going to give her a serious expression. Leafstar also has 3 lines above her eye on the fur, on the brown part of the fur, and 3 lines below. All right, so we have our basic sketch of Leafstar. From there, I'm going to go over it with a pen and refine my details. All right, so I'm going around the outline of the head first. A little bit of fur on the cheeks. And we have that pointed chin I mentioned earlier. Make her look different than some of the other cats that have more squared off chins. She's got a pointed chin. Okay, so let's do the eyes. Again, she has sort of some black markings around her eyes that sort of look like eyelashes. And a line that comes forward towards the nose, coming from the corner of the eyes. And then some lines for her mouth. Again, we're going to give her sort of a serious expression. All right, so I have the main features of Leafstar drawn in. And I'm going to go back with a thicker brush pen and go around the outline of her head. Sort of smooth things out a bit. Sort of indicate some shadow underneath her chin. And fill in her eyes a little bit more. Heavy lines around her eyes. Just sort of almond-shaped eyes that turn up. And then she has a black nose as well, so I'm going to color that in real quick. So now it's time to add the detail of the mask around her face. So I'll use my thinnest pen to do that. You could use any sort of pen. I use little dashed lines. And again, I'm trying to emphasize that leaf shape in the middle of her head. So in the book, she was described as cream with brown markings, so it's sort of up to me to figure out what those brown markings were. And since her name is Leafstar, I wanted to, you know, sort of reference that with the leaf shape. It's subtle, but some people might notice it. And then I use a few more dashes across the bridge of her nose to show that the muzzle is coming forward. Some dashed lines for the stripes on her little mask. So let's erase our pencil sketch, and then we can clean anything else up, add any more details. Okay, I think I'm going to put in some shadows here on her ear. Clean up the lines around her eyes a bit. Try to even that out. And then we have some tufts of fur in her ears. And last but not least, we have the whiskers. And there we have a drawing of Leafstar. Ravenpaw is a black cat. He's also a loner and a little bit more innocent and excited than some of the other cats. Whenever you're drawing, it's best to start with simple shapes. And I'm going to decide which direction we want Ravenpaw to be looking. So maybe this time I'll draw Ravenpaw looking, so I draw my guidelines around that circle to sort of make it look three-dimensional. And I add another circle for the muzzle. And again, we have his ears, just like a cat, has big pointy ears. Then I sketch in where the eyes would be using those guidelines and sketch in a little line coming forward towards the nose that goes around the muzzle. So at this point, again, I could be drawing any cat, but when I start adding the details and the features of Ravenpaw, that's what really makes the character come to life. So Ravenpaw has a different shaped eye than Graystripe. They're a little bigger and they curve upward. So I'll sketch that in first. And also the thing about Ravenpaw is he was described in the books as being a black cat, but I was worried when designing the characters that if I made him entirely black, it would be hard to show expression on his face. So I imagine that his muzzle and the area around his eyes might be a slightly lighter color, more gray. So that's why I sort of created this masking effect around his eyes. So the great thing about that is it sort of acts like a pair of eyebrows as well, so I can show expression. He's also got really nice curvy cheeks. He's a lot softer than Graystripe. He's got a squared off chin though. So he usually has a smile on his face. All right, so we have a very loose and light pencil sketch. And again, you don't want to worry too much about the details at this stage. If you make mistakes, it's just fine. You can always fix that later. But now we have the simple drawing of Ravenpaw. And now I'm going to outline the character with a pen. Again, I like to start with the outline of the head and indicate the soft fur around his cheeks and the squared off chin and the far side of his muzzle. Gets a hard line. So you can see right here he's got a very different shaped face than Graystripe. So it was important to make each cat look unique. So I've sort of gone around the outline of his head. Now it comes to the shape around his eyes, right? So like I said, I sort of have this mask shape around his eyes, and I didn't want there to be harsh lines around his eyes. So I use sort of a feathering technique where I do these nice little curvy shapes around his eyes. So that kind of creates the mask around his eyes. And then again, he's got sort of wide, big eyes that are upturned on the sides. Okay, so again, I'm going to go forward from the corners of the eyes towards his nose. Draw a little line there. All right, and then I'm going to go around the outside of his muzzle, again using that sort of feathering technique. All right. Okay, so from there, I can erase my pencil sketch. So now I can go back and fill in any details that I might have missed. I could use a different pen or a brush pen again. So obviously Ravenpaw is a black cat, as we mentioned earlier. So for today I'm just going to be doing the outline, but you can fill in the face with black color if you want. So another feature of Ravenpaw, he has some little spots on his cheek where his whiskers come out. There are 9 of those. All right, so you definitely don't want to forget his whiskers. You can refine the nose a little bit if you need to. All right, so here's the line drawing of Ravenpaw. He's a black cat, so we would generally fill in that with a black marker or a brush. This is what he would look like finished. Again, it's best to start with simple shapes, whatever you're drawing. I'm drawing a cat, so I'm going to start off with a circle for his head. And I'm going to imagine a line that goes down the middle of the circle and another line that goes across the circle. And then that helps me figure out where to place the second circle for his muzzle. All right, at this point I could turn this into any kind of cat, but I know it's going to be Firestar, so I'm going to start sketching in his ears. He has more of a little squared off face, so I'm sort of sketching in that shape. He's going to be looking straight at us. Using those lines as a guide, I sketch in the placement of his eyes. And then I imagine some lines coming forward onto the muzzle. And I sketch in a triangle shape for his nose. Sketch in his mouth. So I'm going to indicate his body here with some lines. He's got a thicker neck than, say, Ravenpaw or Leafstar. So some of the details about Firestar: he has thinner eyes, and he has sort of some dark lines above his eyes, sort of the opposite of Graystripe. So I'm sketching light and loose because I'm going to go over this with a pen later and add the details. All right, he has a wider nose than Graystripe. Firestar has some lines above his eyes, sort of a light pattern. He's mostly a fiery orange cat, but on some of the original paintings that I saw of Firestar, he had a little bit of marking on his head, so I used those. Also, they kind of reminded me of the shape of a flame. So now we have a simple sketch of Firestar. So now I'm going to go over this drawing with a pen and add a little bit more detail. I like to start with the outline of the head. Some little tufts of fur on his cheek, but obviously not as big as Graystripe. Okay, so I might indicate some tufts of fur on his head instead of making it completely smooth. So as I mentioned earlier, Firestar his eyes are thinner and have some darker lines on the top side of his eyes, sort of the opposite of Graystripe. I guess he was the second cat I was tasked with creating a character design for, so I just wanted them to be different than each other. He always kind of looks like he's squinting. All right, so then I'm going to, from the eyes, I'm going to draw, again, a little line that comes forward towards the nose. And I mentioned he has a wider shaped nose. So I've gone over the outline of the main features on his face. So I'm going to use a thinner pen to add some little hatch marks to go around his muzzle, maybe a little bit on the chin, that comes forward across the bridge of his nose. Then also we have the markings above his eyes. So I use little hatch marks there. Okay, so after that, maybe it's time to erase the pencil lines and we can go back and add any more details. So I'm going to use my brush pen to make some thicker lines around his head. Maybe the thickest line underneath his chin. The shadows in his ears. Maybe I'm going to refine those lines around his eyes. Again, he's got some dark lines above his eye. And maybe on the underside of his nose, I'll clean that up a little bit. Alrighty, and I want to make sure I sketch in some tufts of hair in his ears. Maybe a few more little indications of fur around his cheeks, maybe under his eyes. And last but not least, we can't forget the spots on his muzzle where his whiskers come from. So it's little details like this that make each cat unique. Some cats have the spots on their muzzle, some cats don't. It just kind of depends on the character that I'm designing, and I decided that he would have some of those. And but they definitely all have whiskers, so maybe he's got 4 whiskers. And there we have a drawing of Firestar. So Feathertail is the newest character in the Warriors comic series. She is the daughter of Graystripe and Silverstream, so she has characteristics and features of both. So just like when I draw any character, any cat, I start off with a circle and I draw some lines around that circle to indicate which direction I want the character to be looking. And so I can draw a circle down the middle, a line down the middle, and a line that goes across that circle. And then it helps me place the muzzle where her nose and mouth are. Okay, after that we have some ears, just like all cats have pointy ears. And I start to sort of indicate the shape of the face. She has some tufts of fur on her cheeks and a squared off chin. And then I use those lines to help figure out where I'm going to place her eyes. And coming forward from the eyes around the second circle, I draw lines that go towards the nose, a little triangle shape for the nose. So at this point, I could turn this into pretty much any cat, but it's the details that make Feathertail unique. She has big eyes with dark lines around the top, and little tufts of fur that kind of look like eyelashes that reflect the eyes that her mother had. Sort of a combination of characteristics from Graystripe and Silverstream. She also has a little tuft of fur on her head, like Graystripe, but it's a little softer, more of a curl. She's a long-haired cat, too, like Graystripe. And then she has nice furry cheeks, squared off chin, and sketch in her eyes. And she has a body similar to her dad's, thick fur. Okay, so we have a loose sketch of Feathertail. So now I can go back and add the detail, either with a pen or a marker. So I'm going to go around the outline of her head, just to kind of clean up those lines a bit. I'm going to indicate the little tufts of fur around her eyes on the far side that sort of extend beyond the shape of her head. Okay, so then she has that squared off chin. So we have the little tuft of fur on top of her head. I'm going to just indicate that for now. Get back to that later and add some detail. And the nice thing about starting off with a thinner line is that I can go back with my thicker pen and clean that up if I made any mistakes. So we have the outline of her head, so now I can go back on the inside and start adding more detail. The little tufts of fur around her eyes, with some dark lines around them. I'm going to go back and fill all that in later, but I'm just indicating it for now. All right, so some lines that come forward from her eyes towards the nose. And then I'm going to define the shape of that nose. It's not just a simple triangle shape. She has little nostrils. Okay, so So I'm going to use a solid line to indicate the muzzle on the far side. It goes around her face. Okay, so now I'm going to use a slightly thinner pen to indicate the bridge of her nose and the near side of the muzzle. And I'm going to add some more lines for the little tuft of fur on her head. Maybe some fur around her cheeks. So once I've sort of cleaned this up a little bit, I can erase my pencil sketch. And use a different pen to add any more little details, some tufts of fur in her ears. She also has some little markings on her forehead, sort of like comma shapes. Then I'm going to go around it with my thickest pen, sort of indicate some shadows or thicker lines around the edges. A little shadow underneath that tuft of fur on her head. All right, some shadows in the ears. When you're using a pen, it's usually easier if you move down instead of trying to move up. Make the lines going down. And I can fill in some of this sketchy line work. Clean up those lines around her eyes. And last but not least, we don't want to forget the whiskers on the side of her face. And there we have our drawing of Feathertail.